Hello, welcome. This is Jennifer. Sorry, I haven't had a video in a bit. Just had to handle some family things, but I am back today and sharing something that I really feel doesn't get enough love, and that is ideas for using vellum. I actually did a partial vellum card design in my last video. I'll link to it here. And that got me thinking of more things to share with you. So this video is a bunch of ways to use vellum creatively with other products you may have. And then I'll have another video coming up in the future because I couldn't fit them all in this one. So let's get started. I have a lot to share all about getting new looks from your vellum. Let's get started with this card. I'll show you the finished card first so you know what we'll be doing. Now on this one, I used an embossing folder on a vellum card front, which gives it lots of texture, really unique texture. And this is a see-through card, which is something that's really unusual and always fun to give. For these cards, you need a heavyweight vellum. I use Simon Says Stamp vellum. I'll link to it below, but any heavyweight vellum will work. I have an 8.5 by 11 sheet here, and I'm scoring it right down the middle at 5.5 inches. Scoring is really helpful, but not necessary with vellum. So now I will fold this down and reinforce that score line by using the bone folder, and you'll see you get a nice fold. Now I'll use my trimmer to cut this in half at 4.25 inches. This will give me two top folding vellum cards, and you'll see me use them several times throughout this video. For my first card example, I'm sharing the technique idea of using an embossing folder on vellum. I have the Honeybee 3D embossing folder called Kaleidoscope, and I'm putting my note card made of vellum into this. And I have the back flap of the card hanging out, and I'm making it so the score line of the card lines up with the bottom of the embossing folder. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6 to use this folder, but you could use whatever die cut machine you have. This works great with a lot of 3D and regular embossing folders. The pressure of the embossing folder actually turns the vellum white. So not only do you have the texture that you normally get from an embossing folder, but you have those white lines around it. It's such a unique look. And when you use vellum with an embossing folder, you do it just like you would with regular cardstock. By the way, here is what this folder looks like with white cardstock, so you can see a difference between white cardstock and vellum. For this card and many other cards in this video, I'm using the Honeybee Vintage Label die set. It has this cool frame die and then other dies of the same kind of shape that fit into it. I'll be using the two largest dies throughout this video, and these also provide like a piercing and faux stitching detail that looks incredible. Now for this particular card, I used the larger single label die, and I cut that 4 times from white cardstock. I'm gluing this to all sides of our vellum card so that we have a place to add to the card and a place to write our message. I like to start by gluing on the back. Here I put liquid adhesive around the outside edge, but a bit of tape runner in the center of it just to make sure it doesn't wiggle until it dries. Liquid adhesive on vellum will move quite a bit, but it will hold strong when it dries. So by doing a little tape runner too, that helps to hold it in place. All right, so I put one on the back and I did it as centered as I can. Now I have a second one that I'll glue onto the inside of the card, lining it up with the one that's on the back. Then we'll take our third shape. I'll put adhesive on that. This time, now watch, I'm going to hold this so the adhesive is facing up. It's facing up towards the camera. And I'll line it up with the die cut on the center of our card there, on the inside of our card. I'll line it up and then close the card front onto it, which will grab that adhesive and stay attached to the inside front of the card. Then we have our final one here. I'll put adhesive on that and line it up on the front of the card. This gives it a nice complete and clean look and also adds strength to the vellum card so it'll stand up nicely. Now that we have our card base, let's add to the front of it. I'm using the Honeybee Lovely Layers Winter Greenery die set. This is a great one because it has lots of different types of greenery that you can use in different ways. I'll use this several times throughout this video. Now off screen, I die cut a bunch of pieces from this die set. Look at all those die cuts ready to go to add to cards. I'm also using the Honeybee Lovely Layers Winter Birds die set. There are pieces to create 2 birds in this, and I'll use the cardinal on this card and the other bird later in this video. Now, I'm not showing the die cutting and gluing together of all the die cuts because it's easy to do. And Honeybee has a download on their website showing how to layer their die cuts together, which makes it very easy to follow, easier than doing in a video. So I will link to those with the products down below. So here I'm gluing some of the greenery and our cardinal onto the front of the card, trying to land most of my die cuts on that white die cut. I did cut the feet off of the birds, sorry about that, but I will glue those back on now that it's arranged. So it looks like the bird is sitting on the branch. So by having his feet on top of the branch, it looks like he's sitting on it. I also tucked in die cut greenery behind the bird just to make it look a little more full. I also added red berries to the branch. Now, one of the things that I recommend doing if you're creating a little die cut assembly like this is to use different shades of cardstock. So I use different shades of green, different shades of red, which really helps to bring it alive. For a sentiment on this one and on other cards in this video, there are 2 different Honeybee stamp sets that I'm really liking. On the left, we have Home for the Holidays, which has a really classic look and sentiments that work well on the inside of the card. On the right, we have Honeybee Let Nature Sing, which has a lot of classic sentiments. Both of these have coordinating dies available. I chose to use Warmest Wishes from the Home for the Holidays set. I also wanted to add a little sparkle without being too overwhelming. My solution to that is using Tim Holtz Rock Candy Distress Glitter. This stuff is magical. It looks like fallen snow. It doesn't have a color, it's not iridescent, so it doesn't take away from your project. So I'm putting little bits of Gina K Connect liquid adhesive in different spots on the front of the card. Then I pour on top of it the Rock Candy Distress Glitter, and I set it aside to dry. We can knock the excess off later on. This just looks like fallen snow on the project, and it is magical. It catches the light very nicely, but again doesn't change the color behind it. So here is the completed card. You can see how, since it's vellum, you can see through the outside edge. But because we added those 4 white die cuts, we have a place to decorate on the front of the card, a place to write a message on the inside of the card, and a place to write hand stamped by on the back of the card. Also, the card is made of vellum, however, it's strong enough to stand up on its own and stands up nicely on display. And with a closer look, you can see that texture we created by using the embossing folder, which is one of the best ways to step up your vellum. All right, now let's move on to the next example, and this one involves adding texture to your vellum using a die. Because I like this look so much, I have a few different examples for you. So here's a look at the completed card that we're doing first. That little panel across the center is see-through thanks to the vellum. And when you look up close to it, you can see the texture that we have on that vellum, that kind of white texture that was created with a background die. This time I'm using the new Honeybee Winter Gems plate. Now this plate doesn't actually cut anything, it makes an impression. However, stay tuned. Later in this video, I'll show you how to do this with plates that do cut. So I have set up my die cut machine as I would to make an impression with the die on cardstock, but instead we'll use the vellum. All die cut machines should have in their instruction manual what sandwich to use. For my Spellbinders Platinum 6, I use the platform, then I use the B plate. Next, the flexible embossing mat, which is what allows you to make an impression with a plate or die. Now on that, we'll put our piece of vellum, then the plate face down, and then finally finish it off with the embossing plate. Again, if you have a different machine, just follow the instruction manual for making an impression with a die. All right, after I run that through, that plate will press that texture into the vellum, again leaving that kind of white outline and lots of texture. So this does stand out more if you put something dark behind it, as I am doing here, but it's just beautiful and has lots of texture in real life. To add this to a panel on the front of our card is very simple. I have a note card that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I'll open up the note card and cut off most of the front of the card. I'll actually cut it so that I'm an inch from the fold line. So there's only an inch flap on the front of the card. Now the rest of it I'll cut into 1-inch strips. Instead of letting it go to waste, we'll use these strips to finish assembling the card. So I will cut 3 1-inch strips from this. All right, back to the card with that little flap on the front. I'll put liquid adhesive on that flap and then lay our vellum piece onto that adhesive. We're going to sandwich that vellum piece between all of this cardstock. Now this piece doesn't need to be this big, so I'm going to cut a little bit of it off, but everything here is 5 1/2 inches wide. So I'll lay that vellum onto that exposed adhesive. Then I'll put adhesive on top of this, right on top of that vellum, and put one of our 1-inch cardstock strips on top. So basically we have sandwiched that vellum piece between the cardstock so that we're reforming that front of our note card once again, but with the vellum in the center. Now I'll put liquid adhesive along the bottom of the vellum and lay another one of the 1-inch strips onto that. And I'll make sure that that 1-inch strip lines up with the bottom of our white note card in the back. All right, so once that is in place, I will just open up the card and put our last strip of white adhesive here along the back. So again, this side of the vellum is sandwiched between those two 1-inch white cardstock strips. This gives us a nice strong note card and a nice finished look on the inside of the card also. So this will stand up nicely on display, and we have that clear section there in the middle with that fun texture. I'm adding 2 thin strips of scrap silver glitter cardstock to the front of the card, right along the edge of those white cardstock pieces, just to give it a nice framed look. I will trim off the excess and also add some little house and church die cuts. This is the Honeybee Winter Villages die set, and I am over the moon about this die set. I use it many times in this video, and it is great for creating a winter scene, but you could definitely use it all year round. I again have a link below to this product at Honeybee, and they have a download on how to assemble these. It's easy to follow the instructions, so I'm not sharing it in the video because this video is long enough as is, but I just followed their instructions and created these 2 houses and the church. I love that these dies offer so many different details you can add to them to really create a fun scene. So after I glued all of my pieces onto that vellum panel, I did also create a little note card to go inside of the card. This I cut to be about 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And I'll glue that to the inside so that I can write a personal message in there and it won't show through the front of the card. I added sentiments to the front and inside of the card using the Honeybee Home for the Holidays stamp set that I showed you earlier. Now here you can see how there's a card inside of a card, so you have a place for your personal message. Now the front card flap you can see through thanks to that vellum, and you can see the texture that we have on that vellum thanks to making an impression with a die. Here you can also see the fun details that I added to that little snow scene. I used white glitter cardstock for snowbanks, and I just followed the instructions from Honeybee. I love that those dies even make an impression on the cardstock, adding that textured detail. You can see that on the roof of the houses and the church. So this card shows you another way to use vellum for a see-through portion of a card, and how to use a die to make an impression on the vellum. Let's do another example of that, using a die to make an impression on vellum. This one's a little bit different. Let's look at the completed card first. You can actually see through the front of the card to the inside, which is shimmery black, but there is a little white area where you can write a personal message on the inside. Again, I used a die to create texture on the vellum, which adds a lot of interest and detail. This time I'm using 2 dies from Honeybee called the Ornate A2 dies. These are sold separately, but can be used together or separately. One will make an impression and cut some details. The other creates an outline that lines up on top nicely. Now that die on the left there, let me show you what that looks like if you use it like you normally would with a die on cardstock. You can see it makes an impression for part of the pattern, but also cuts for other parts of the pattern. This worked really well on vellum. I really like this background, and I'm loving that Honeybee is offering these dies that impress instead of cut. Now this is what it looks like when you use it on vellum. So you can see a comparison between the white that I showed you and how much more the pattern shows up on vellum. I love the result. I did die cut the other die from white cardstock, and I'll glue that right on top of the vellum. I like how these dies work well together or separately. By the way, you could use any adhesive for your vellum with any of the techniques I'm showing today because I always hide my adhesive. I like to use Gina K Connect because it dries nice and strong. I have a top-folded 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card that I made from Spellbinders brushed black cardstock. I love their brushed cardstocks. It has like a metallic look to it. They're just gorgeous, and this black is stunning. I'm cutting off most of the front of the card, just so there's like a 1/4 inch flap at the top. I'll save the rest of that cardstock for another project. I'm putting liquid adhesive along this flap. You want something super strong, double-sided tape would work too. I'm taking our vellum and cardstock die cut piece and placing it right onto that flap, lining it up. So now this will be our card front and the black will be the card back. Off screen, I created another of these white die cuts, and I'm trimming a little bit off the top edge, just a little bit. This will help to let the card come together better and fold down nicely. Now on my card, I have it opened up, and on the back side of the front of the card, where there's vellum facing up, I'll put liquid adhesive in the areas where there's white cardstock on the other side. I'll then take this white cardstock die cut, put the trim edge close to the score line on the black piece, and press down. So now there's a white die cut on both sides with vellum sandwiched between, and our black cardstock piece is attached to the back. This is just another way to create a see-through card front. All right, now I have die cut some large white circles, 3 of them. I'm gluing one to the top center on the front of the card. Then I'll open the card and I'll glue one right behind that on the inside back of the front of the card. It's hard to describe all these parts, but this will just hide the adhesive from the circle that's on the front. You could skip that one if you wanted to. On the third circle, I'll put adhesive on the back of it, lay it down adhesive face up here, adhesive face up, line it up with that circle, close our black card onto it. That will grab the adhesive, and now all of our circles are lined up nicely. That white circle on the black is where we can write our personal message. To decorate the front of the card, I'm using the Honeybee Lovely Layers Poinsettia die set. This is another great die set that also makes those embossed details like on the leaves and petals. Now look at this. See how some of the petals have the embossed detail and some don't? That helps you to figure out which way to line these up. When I glue this second die cut on top of the first, I'm lining up with the petals that do not have the detail on it. That way the dark petals with the detail are sticking out. It's just a way they make it so it's easier to layer. Again, they have downloads showing just how to layer these very easily. I really like that all of these dies create those little impressions, those details, simply by die cutting with them. It cuts a shape and makes that impression. Now I'll glue this poinsettia to that circle on the front of the card and also tuck some little leaves in. I also die cut some vellum pieces from the Winter Greens die set that I showed you earlier and tuck those in too. Now for a sentiment, I'm using the Honeybee Artsy Angel. This has a beautiful image, but I'm really liking these sentiments a lot, and I use them on this card and another card later on. I stamped Joy to the World with black ink and used the coordinating die to cut it out and glued that onto the front of the card. Here you can see how the card stands up nicely, and the card front is see-through, and that black inside really stands out. Here's a closer look at the detail that we have on the vellum. I love how using a die to make an impression really makes the vellum change to white, so it stands out more. You can also see I die cut some greenery from vellum and have that glued behind our flower. I just feel like that adds even more interest to the card. And I also added some honeybee gemstones to the center of the flower for sparkle. I'll show you those gemstones a little bit later. My next example not only has a fun vellum technique, adding texture to the vellum, but also a fun vellum card design. Here's a look at the completed card. You can see portions are see-through on the front, and then check out the inside of the card. That's actually open. I just think it's fun to create something different than what you could buy in a store. Also, the vellum on here has amazing texture. I wish you could feel it in real life, and it's very easy to create. For this, all you need is a die that creates a pierced pattern or faux stitching pattern, such as this honeybee pierced rainbow cover plate. Notice there are no sharp edges that cut. This just does a pierced rainbow pattern. We're going to make an impression with this piercing plate. So I have set up my die cut machine as if I were making an impression on cardstock with a regular die. But instead we'll use vellum, then this piercing plate on top, and run that through our die cut machine. Now you can make an impression with any die, it doesn't matter, but this piercing plate does a really cool thing with vellum. Wherever the vellum is stretched or pressed, it turns white, so it really stands out. And the backside is cool because it has this fun texture to it. I wish you could feel it in real life. I'll use the backside on this card, but you can use whatever you want. To form the card base, I have the large die cut from the die set I showed you earlier. I'm taking the second largest die and cutting it from the center. So we have this outlined frame, like an ornate outlined frame. That will be what we use on the front of our card. On the back of that frame die cut, I'll put some strong adhesive, and then I'll lay our vellum piece onto it. Always make sure you put something heavy on it while it dries to make sure it stays in good contact. All right, now I've also cut 3 die cuts as you see here, and I'm cutting a little bit off the top of each. Again, this is just to make it easier for all the layers to line up as we form this into a card. We need to also create a hinge from vellum to connect all of these pieces together. So I'm taking a piece of vellum and I'm folding it down the center. So you can see I have this folded piece here. It really doesn't matter how wide this piece is. I will then cut most of one of the flaps off. I just want about 1/4 of an inch there next to the fold line. This will be a little hinge that will connect these die cuts to form a card. All right, so now I need to glue this little hinge here at the top of one of my die cuts. So I have a die cut here. I'm putting liquid adhesive right along that top edge where we trimmed a little bit off before. I'll place that little flap onto it and then really press it down and make sure it connects nicely. Then we will take one of our other die cuts and glue that on top. So basically, our little flap of vellum will be sandwiched between these 2 die cuts. This is one of the easiest ways to connect die cuts together so that you can have the front and the back of your card be made of die cuts. All right, so once that has dried, we can also add the front die cuts to the other part of the vellum that is sticking out the top there. I'll trim that part of the vellum down to be about 1/4 of an inch from the fold line. So you can see how tiny that vellum is now, but it does have a fold line right down the center. I'll put liquid adhesive on that flap. Then I'll take another die cut and put it face down on top of the ones we've already glued together. And I'll fold that little flap onto it, connecting that adhesive on the vellum to the back of this die cut. And I'll hold that there while it dries. So basically we just have a vellum hinge there at the top that's connecting these die cuts. So we end up with the fun card with those openings. Now I'll put glue on top of this and place our die cut that has the vellum already attached that we did earlier. So the front of the card has the vellum. You can see through those side parts. And then the inside of the card is completely see-through on the side. We just need to trim off that excess vellum on the edge. I'll be honest, I really liked how this turned out, this portion, so I plan to go and die cut a bunch of these frames so that I can make more cards like this. You can add anything you want at that center. What I decided to put inside of that center frame is that church die cut, as I showed you before. Just arrange those die cuts and some trees together. I also put some white glitter cardstock towards the bottom portion. Now here you see I used the Hero Arts Circle Confetti die. It's over there on the left. It's meant for a background, but it also cuts a bunch of tiny little circles. I cut that from white glitter cardstock, and I glued some of those little dots coming down from the sky around the church. so that the glitter snow falling matches the glitter snow that we have on the ground below the church. I also added a Rejoice sentiment from the Angel stamp set that I showed you earlier. So check out this cool card design. It's vellum on the front, see-through on the inside, but plenty of room for a personal message, and it stands up nicely on display. Here you can better see the little dots of glitter paper that I glued for snow falling down, and also the texture that we created on the vellum using that piercing plate. Also, you can see the texture and details on those church die cuts. I just love them so much. So definitely try using your piercing or faux stitching dies on vellum. All right, now the next fun way to use vellum is to hot foil on it. I love the look of foil on vellum. It is stunning. You'll see in a moment. But if you do not have a foil machine, you could also just gold heat emboss and get a similar look. I'll show heat embossing in a moment. Now here is the completed card, and look at that foil detail on the front of it. The card is see-through, making it more interesting, but really the highlight of this card is that gold foil detail on the vellum. It's beautiful. To do my foiling, I'm actually using the Honeybee Winter Gems plate that I showed you earlier. This is meant to just make an impression on cardstock, but I wanted to show you that you can foil with this also. You can in fact foil with any dies you have. I'll link to a video showing that up here on the top right. Now for this card, I have my Spellbinders Glimmer foil machine. Any foil machine will work for this. I also have a vellum note card that I've opened up, and I'm taping that plate onto the front of it, kind of creating a hinge up there. I'm cutting a piece of Spellbinders gold matte foil and placing it between the vellum and the plate. And then I will pick all of this up and lay it plate side down onto my hot foil machine. Remember, this is not a hot foil plate, but I'm going to foil in the same way, but I will make one change. So I have this all on my hot Glimmer machine, and I'll take 2 pieces of heavyweight cardstock to use as a shim. That's what I like to add when I am foiling with a die. Then I put on the 2 regular plates that come with the Glimmer machine, and I press the timer button. When the timer button stops flashing, I give it another minute, and then I take all of the plates out together and run it through my Spellbinders Platinum die cut machine. So the Glimmer machine provides the heat, the die cut machine applies the pressure. If you have a different die cut machine, there are other foil machines out there. You just need to look at the manufacturer's instructions. Now, the difference between the foiling I did here with a die and the difference I do normally with a foil plate is that when I'm using a die, I do those 2 cardstock shims and I let it heat up a little bit longer after the timer goes off. And look at that beautiful gold foil detail on the vellum. I am crazy about this. The detail, it's very fine detail because this isn't really a hot foil plate. This is meant for doing impression with a die. But you can stretch your dies and get this fun foil detail look by just making those simple changes. And again, I'll link to the video up in the top right, which goes into it in much more detail. But this is just a good reminder that you can foil on your vellum. All right, so let's turn this into a card. I have 4 of those white label die cuts, and I'm gluing one onto the front of the card just towards the bottom right. I will then open that and glue one on the other side so that that vellum is sandwiched between. The only reason I put one there is so that it gives a nice clean look. You definitely don't have to put one there if you don't want to. Then I have another one that I'm lining up and I'll close my card onto it, and that will be the die cut where you write the personal message. And then we'll glue one onto the back of the card where you can do your hand stamped by. After all of these have dried, I will just trim the excess that's hanging off the side. Now this is actually strong enough that it'll stand up on its own because I'm using a heavyweight vellum, and I've added the strength of those additional die cuts, so it has no problem standing up. Off screen, I gold heat embossed Let Heaven and Nature Sing from the Honeybee Let Nature Sing stamp set that I showed you earlier in this video. I then am altering this little branch die cut from the Winter Greenery die set and gluing that right above the sentiment. Don't be afraid to change up your die cuts to make it fit your design better. I also have a bird from the bird die set I showed you earlier. That bird die set includes the cardinal and this one. I added some other greeneries from green cardstock, and now I'm adding some gemstones from a Honeybee gem set. Now, these are great. Honeybee has so many gemstone and pearl packs that have the adhesive already on the back, and they have so many different options. I really like the red ones I'm using here. And throughout the video, I used some of the red and gold mixed ones. They're just gorgeous. I'll link below to all of the gemstones. There are many options. So here is a look at the completed card. I love that gold foil on vellum. And the card is made of vellum, but notice it'll still stand up on display nicely. Just make sure again that you use a heavier weight vellum. You can test out the vellums you use or you have before you actually use them on a card. Just make sure that if you cut one into a note card shape, that it'll stand up on its own. There you can see the red gemstones I added and that gold foil detail in the background. You can see that also that the gold heat embossing matches the foil nicely. So if you don't have a foil machine, you could always gold heat emboss a background stamp on vellum for a somewhat similar look. Speaking of heat embossing, let's do an example of that. Here I'm showing that you can heat emboss on vellum to really step it up and add some fun. In this case, I used a subtle embossing powder that allows it to still be see-through, but you could use white, colored, gold, silver embossing powders, whatever you want. I'm using the Honeybee Holly Jolly background stamp. What's really great about this background stamp is there are coordinating dies available to cut out some of the words to use as sentiments. I really appreciate that companies are getting creative like this to offer us more ways to use our products. Now for my card, I am just heat embossing the background, but it's nice to know that I have the option to die cut out some of those words to use as sentiments on our cards. So I have a top folding 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch vellum note card, and I'm placing the background stamp to stamp on the front of that card. I'm using my anti-static powder tool, then stamping the background stamp with VersaMark ink. You could use whatever embossing powder you want on this, but I'm choosing to use Hero Art's Satin Pearl embossing powder. The cool thing about this powder is it gives a pearly look to whatever color cardstock you do the embossing on. Since I'm doing on vellum, it basically gives a clear, pearly, raised look wherever you do the heat embossing. It's hard to describe, but here you can see the beautiful result you get. It's very subtle but gorgeous in real life. So off screen, I assembled the card very much like the cardinal card that I did earlier, with the die cuts on all sides of the card lining up nicely. However, this time I used the little house and tree die cuts and also added the confetti snow coming down. But look closely, look at that heat embossing that we have on the vellum. It is so eye-catching in real life, yet subtle enough that it doesn't distract from the main focus of the card. But if you want it to stand out more, you could definitely use any embossing powder that you have. So remember, heat embossing looks great on vellum. By the way, the sentiment on this card is from the Santa Claus stamp set called Saint Nick. There is a coordinating die set available, and I just thought the Believe in the Magic of Christmas worked well on this card. Okay, my next couple cards show how you can use stencils with vellum. It gives such a beautiful result. All right, so here I have the card that we're doing first. You can see there is a vellum overlay where I did stenciling with basic dye inks. For this card, I used the Honeybee Under the Mistletoe stencils. There are 3 stencils that are easy to line up. I like that Honeybee stencils are clear, and then they have etching that helps you line up with the other stencil layers. It's hard to describe, but in real life, it really makes it a lot easier. So I have a vellum note card here that I'm taping onto the back of the first stencil. And then over this, I will use a dye ink. I find dye inks work best on vellum because they eventually will dry nicely on them. You can try other inks that you may have, but I encourage you to test them first before creating a project. One of the things to remember when you apply ink on vellum is you need to use a darker color of ink than you want the final results on the vellum to be. So here I'm using a dark green ink. You can see it's going down dark, but when I wipe away the excess, it will lighten the ink. If you want to make it darker, you can try applying multiple layers of ink, but it always will soften a bit. What I like to do is then remove the stencil and heat set that ink. You don't want that to smear. If you heat set it, it will dry and you'll have nice, beautiful color on the vellum, although it will be softer than the color of ink you applied. Now I'm moving on to the second stencil, and this stencil has etching on it that lines up with the inking we've already done, making it very easy to layer these stencils. This time I'm applying a lighter color of green ink, so this will end up very light in the end. But I will put down as much ink as I can, wipe away the excess, and heat set it. And it gives a gorgeous look. So you'll get softer results than you will get on cardstock, but the results are still very beautiful. It's like you're creating your own pattern vellum. Now we can do the third stencil, and again, this has etching on it that allows you to line up with the inking you've already done, making sure you have good placement. The clear stencils are very helpful. I was surprised about that. I didn't think I would like it, but man, it makes it easy to line up with what you've done. Now I decided to do a red color over this. I know that's not traditional for mistletoe, but I thought that pop of red would be nice. And what I discovered is you could use the stencil like this, how it's oriented here, but you could also rotate it and get a different look, which would allow you to use it all year round. You could use yellow instead of the red and get maybe a springtime look or something for the summer. I just love that pattern. And by doing this inking on vellum, you can put different colors of cardstock behind it, which will give you all different looks. On my card, I decided to put white behind it so that the true colors would show, but you have lots of options. Use whatever cardstock you want. If you do decide to use ink on vellum, always make sure you heat set it so that it doesn't smear. A little bit of time with the heat gun will really set that color. I did decide to trim that vellum piece down to be about 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and I'll have that on the front of a white note card. I die cut 4 of these white die cut labels, and I glued those together for a stacked look. I then glued them on the back of that vellum piece. This will give that vellum piece some raised dimension that will allow our vellum to kind of float on the front of our card. I then put glue on the back of those die cuts and added it to a white note card that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I have another white die cut here, and on it I have assembled some of the Winter Village die cuts along with a stamp sentiment. Here I'm putting some liquid adhesive around different areas of the house and the ground, and then I will add more of that rock candy glitter. I'll also put little dots in the sky of little liquid adhesive and add some glitter to that. This is a great way to mimic the look of snowfall. Once that glue behind the glitter has dried, I will put glue on the front of our vellum and add that die cut in place. And I can also use a brush to knock away any of the excess glitter. Just make sure the glue is dried before you do that. For the sentiment on this card, I used the Honeybee Beautiful Blooms stamp set. There are great images on here and coordinating dies and coordinating stencils available. However, I just used a sentiment and stamped that at the bottom of our die cut. So here you can see the completed card. It's just a regular white note card, and that vellum looks like it's floating on top of our card because we put additional die cuts behind it. Here you can also see that rock candy glitter and the detail in those Winter Village die cuts. I can't get enough of them. Now this could have been a holiday card, but I decided to make it a winter thank you card instead. So this card shows that you can use stencils and dye ink to add interest to vellum. My last card also features using vellum along with stencils. However, this time we're using a glitter paste on top to add some sparkle. Here is a look at the completed card. It's very similar to the church card that we created earlier, but I do have a little flap on the inside to hide our personal message. Now on this one, we're using the Honeybee Nordic Winter Stencil Layering Die Set. There are 2 stencils that are very easy to line up. I'm placing a piece of vellum behind the first stencil, and I'll apply a blue ink over it. Again, I suggest using a dye ink and use a color of ink that's darker than you want on your final result. Once I've applied that ink, I'll wipe away the excess with a dry cloth, and then we'll move on to the second stencil. Again, it's very easy to line up because it's clear and has etching that lines up with your previous inking. This time, instead of applying ink, I'm applying Lawn Fawn Fairy Dust Paste. This is a clear paste with iridescent glitter inside. You could use whatever paste you want, but this is to show you can use all of your gels and pastes over a stencil onto your vellum. Again, I do recommend a heavyweight vellum so that it doesn't warp too much, but look at that beautiful result so far. Once it's dry, I created a die cut frame like we did on the church card earlier. I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back of it and laying it onto our vellum, and I'll give it some time to dry. While that dries, I have a blue die cut here that I'm going to create a score line about a 1/2 inch from the top. I'm using my scoreboard here, and watch, I'll just do a little score line here close to the top. And then I'll fold that back and forth a few times to create a hinge. This will go inside of our card to hide our personal message. All right, so I have a solid frame die cut that will serve as the back of our card. At the top of this blue frame above the score line, I'm putting liquid adhesive and adding it to the center of our die cut. That will create a little hinge for our card to open and close. Now that our vellum is dry, I'm trimming off the excess. This will be the front of our card. So now we have the front of our card over there on the left and the inside of our card that has that blue die cut glued to the center with the hinge. To put these two panels together to form a card, I have a piece of vellum that I'm folding right down the center. This will form a hinge just like we did on the church card earlier. I'll trim one side so it's about 1/4 inch from the score line or that fold line. I also have 2 white die cut frames that I'm holding together and trimming a little bit off the top. This just helps when you assemble the card. I'm also trimming a little bit off the top of this panel that will be the inside of our card. You don't have to do that, but I think it gives better results. I flipped our vellum card front over, and on the back I'm putting liquid adhesive along the top. And I'm laying that tiny little vellum flap onto it and pressing it down. I will then put liquid adhesive along the back of this vellum wherever there is white frame die cut behind it. And then I'll take one of my other white frame die cuts and line it up. That will sandwich that little vellum flap between it. This forms our card front completely. I'll put something heavy on that while it dries. Once it is dry, I'll trim off the rest of the vellum flap there. So that is about 1/4 inch from the score line once again. So you can see that vellum is just this little piece with the score line down the center, forming the hinge between the front and the back of our card. I put liquid adhesive on that, and now we have the back of our card. I'm lining it up with the front, and I'll press that hinge down, and I'll put something heavy on it while it dries. The last step is to take that last frame die cut and glue it to the back of our card just to sandwich that little vellum flap between and give it a nice clean look. Once dry, we can trim that little bit of vellum that's sticking out on the top sides, and there we have a fun card base with the vellum on the front and the clear opening on the inside. To decorate the front, I use the Honeybee Layering Holiday Bells die set. This is a great one. This also creates impressions to add detail, and it's very easy to line up. The bow on it could be used all year round. So off screen, I die cut and assembled 2 of the bells, and I added some winter greenery around it from the die set I showed you earlier. Now, when you open up the card, you'll see that flap on the inside. That just allows you to hide your personal message, but you could skip it if you want to and just use the basic design that I showed you with the church card earlier. I really wish you could see that inking and that glitter paste that we used on the vellum. It's so beautiful in real life, adds a lot of texture, and you can see through that vellum on the outside edge to the inside of the card. By the way, all of the sentiments on this card are from the Honeybee Jingle All the Way stamp set. I hope these card ideas inspire you to look at your vellum differently and how you can really make it stand out on your card using it with different products you likely already have. If you are interested in learning more about the products I use today, I have them linked to multiple sources in my YouTube description below. And you can check out my blog for a lot more information, along with the ability to save or bookmark videos or cards for future reference. There are also a couple other videos linked here if you want some additional inspiration, and I thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you again soon.